There is a dangerous beauty in raw ambition and the lengths people will go to achieve their ultimate dreams. Witness the rise and the risks in our latest series of high-stakes cinematic dramas. Hit subscribe now and see what happens when the stakes are high.
Dan Saturn, Dumbish, Adunha, Fotumage, et Humpatum, et Situm, et Septimen, Tkupenford, Althen Bisend, Drumenford, Frambet Summitwum. Because that morning on the porch, with Earl's hand on my arm and his eyes watching the driveway like he was waiting for something terrible. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of everything that happened in the 2 years before it. It started with ice. January in Asheville, North Carolina, doesn't usually freeze like that. But the winter I turned 64, the temperature dropped to 9 degrees and stayed there for a week. The pipes in my house on Brevard Road burst on a Tuesday night while I was asleep. I woke up to the sound of water running where water had no business running. And by the time I got to the kitchen, the floor was already warped. I'd lived in that house for 22 years. Beverly and I had bought it the year after our youngest started school. It was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch out back, big enough for a garden she never quite got around to planting. She passed 4 years ago. Stroke, fast and final. The way her doctor said she would have wanted it if she'd had a choice. I kept the house the way she left it, right down to the half-finished crossword on the kitchen table. Sentimental, maybe, but it was mine and it was all I had left of a life we built together. The water damage wasn't the worst of it. The contractor I hired found mold behind the walls, black, the spreading kind. The estimate to fix everything came to $41,000. My insurance covered $17,000. I called my brother. Victor was 58, 6 years younger than me, and he'd done well for himself. Financial consulting, clients all over the Southeast. He drove a new truck every other year, and lived in a house in Kenilworth that had a 3-car garage and a view of the French Broad River. I'd helped him when he was starting out, lent him $8,000 back in 2003 when his first firm nearly went under. He'd paid it back every cent, so I didn't feel strange calling. "You're in a tough spot," he said. I could hear the refrigerator hum on his end, the comfortable sounds of a warm house. "But Ray, that's a lot of money, and honestly, at your age, maybe this is the universe telling you something." The universe. I was standing in my kitchen with a wet sock on my foot, my dead wife's crossword puzzle still damp on the table, and my brother was talking about the universe. "I'm not asking for charity," I said. "I'll sign something, whatever you need." "It's not about trust." He paused. "I just don't think I should be the one to solve this for you. You're 64 years old, Ray. At some point, you have to figure out your own finances." I hung up and stood there for a long time. I found a room at the Extended Stay America on Tunnel Road while the contractors worked on the mold. $49 a night, a microwave and a coffee maker. Cable I never turned on. I started looking for work the next week. My pension from 31 years of postal service covered my basics, but not a $41,000 hole in my life. I found a position doing security at an outpatient surgery center on Marymount Avenue. Overnight shift, mostly sitting, some walking rounds. The pay was decent enough. That's where I met Earl. He drove a bread delivery route for a regional bakery out of Weaverville. Started at 4 in the morning, finished his last stop around 7, sometimes 8. The surgery center was on his route. He'd pull his white panel van into the side lot to take a break and eat his lunch. An early lunch, the kind that happens at 6 in the morning when you've already been working for 2 hours. First time he spoke to me, I was standing outside during a break, cold enough to see my breath. He lowered his window and said, "You want half a sandwich? I always make too much." I said, "No, thank you." He said, "Suit yourself," and ate his sandwich alone. The second week, I said yes. His name was Earl Pruitt. 61 years old, widower, same as me. His wife Donna had died of kidney failure 3 years back. He had a daughter in Portland who called on Sundays and a son in Fayetteville who called when he needed something. He said it with no bitterness, just the flat honesty of a man who'd learned not to dress things up. "You got family here?" he asked me one morning. "Brother, lives across town. Close?" I thought about that for a second. We were. He didn't push, just nodded and handed me the other half of a turkey sandwich on wheat. Over the next few weeks, Earl became the most reliable part of my day, or my night technically. He'd pull into the lot around 6:15, and if things were quiet at the surgery center, I'd walk out and we'd sit in the cold and talk. About nothing important. About his delivery route and the restaurants that left their back doors unlocked. About my years sorting mail and the strange things people mail each other. About Beverly and Donna. Not in a sad way, more like you'd talk about a song you used to love, with affection for the fact that you'd gotten to hear it at all. I was still at the extended stay when the application call started. I'd been quietly putting in for jobs. Better pay, day shifts, a warehouse coordinator position at a building supply company in Arden, a facilities manager job at a retirement community up in Weaverville. Real jobs, nothing glamorous, but steady. The first rejection came on a Wednesday morning. The HR woman at the building company sounded uncomfortable. We received some information about your work history, some concerns about reliability. I asked her what kind of concerns. She said she wasn't able to share specifics. The retirement community called 2 days later. Same language, reliability. Previous performance issues. I had 31 years with the United States Postal Service, a clean record. Not one disciplinary note in my file. I wasn't unreliable. Someone was telling people I was. I told Earl the next morning. He was quiet for a minute, which was not like him. You got any idea who? I had one idea. I didn't want to say it out loud. That evening I called Victor. He picked up on the second ring, which was unusual. How are you holding up? He said, before I could say anything. Cheerful. Too cheerful. Did you call anyone about my job applications? Silence. Victor. I'm looking out for you, Ray. His voice shifted into something practiced, the tone he used with difficult clients. Those aren't the right jobs for you. You're not 25. You push yourself into something too demanding, and you'll end up worse off. You told them I was unreliable. I expressed concerns about your current situation. Your judgment. The financial mess you're in. You told them I had job performance issues. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. I think you need to focus on what's actually important, which is stabilizing your situation, not chasing jobs you're not ready for. I hung up. I lay in the extended stay that night staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what I'd done to deserve this. Victor and I had never been close in the way some brothers are, but we'd been solid. The kind of family that showed up for each other at funerals and graduations and didn't need much more than that. But this wasn't indifference. This was something calculated. Something that required effort. I didn't understand why. Not yet. The next Thursday morning, Earl was already in the lot when I came out for my break, but he didn't get out of the van. He was just sitting there, both hands on the wheel, engine idling. I knocked on the window. He looked at me like he'd forgotten I existed, then unlocked the door. Something happened, he said. His hands were gripping the wheel the way you grip something when you're trying not to shake. Yesterday, on my route, I came around the back of the surgery center about 3 in the afternoon, my last delivery of the day. And your brother's truck was parked in the lot. I recognized it from the picture you showed me, the blue F-250 with the Clemson sticker. I felt the back of my neck go cold. He was talking to 2 men. Not anyone I recognized. They looked, I don't know how to describe it, like they were being paid to be there. Nice clothes, but wrong somehow. Too careful about it. Earl pulled out his phone. I had a bad feeling, so I parked on the street and I kept my phone out. I got about 40 seconds of video before they moved inside. He handed me the phone. The footage was shaky, taken through the van's windshield. But I could see Victor clearly, his blue F-250 in the background. He was talking with 2 men near a dark sedan. One of them said something and Victor nodded. Then Victor said, and this part was clear enough, the window had been cracked for air. He doesn't have anyone else. That's the point. He's completely isolated now. One of the men said something I couldn't make out. Victor's voice again. The night shift ends at 6. He walks to the bus stop on Marymount. It's completely dark. If it looks like a mugging. Earl stopped the video. We sat there in the van, and the morning light was turning the mountains pink and pretty above the tree line, and I could not make what I'd just heard fit inside my understanding of anything. He wants to kill me, I said. It came out flat, like I was reading it off a wall, Sounds that way. Earl's voice was careful, and I'm in it now, too. I've been with you every morning for 3 months. People notice that. I handed him back his phone. Why? I said. It was the only question that mattered. What does he get? Earl looked at me steadily. What did Beverly leave? I thought about Beverly's estate. When she died, I hadn't been in any shape to think carefully about finances. Victor had offered to help. He was the numbers man in the family. He'd handled the paperwork, told me what to sign, told me it was all standard. The life insurance transfer, the bank account consolidation, the investment accounts. I'd trusted him because he was my brother, and I was 60 years old, and I'd just lost my wife. I started to realize I didn't actually know what Beverly had left. I need to see the documents, I said. Everything from when Beverly died. Where would they be? I thought about it. Our attorney had been Stuart Oakes, a solo practice guy on Broadway who'd handled Beverly's will. I hadn't spoken to Stuart in 4 years. I didn't know if he still had copies of everything. But I knew someone who might. Beverly's sister June lived in Black Mountain, 20 minutes east. She and Beverly had been close. The kind of close that means they talked about things they didn't tell their husbands. Beverly had trusted her with her thinking. I called June that afternoon. She was cautious at first. Victor had apparently spoken to her recently, mentioned that I was going through a difficult time, that I'd been saying strange things. I told her to ignore all of that. I told her I needed to come over. She said, okay, come for dinner. She met me at the door with a look that was half worried and half something else. Something that had been sitting in her chest for a while. She made coffee, and we sat at her kitchen table, and I asked her directly, did Beverly ever talk to her about her estate? About what she was leaving behind? June set down her mug. Beverly called me 3 weeks before she died, she said. She was worried. She told me she'd found out some things about your finances, about investments Victor was managing for both of you. She thought Victor had been redirecting things. She wasn't sure of the details. She wanted to talk to a lawyer first before she said anything to you, because she didn't want to alarm you without proof. She paused. She never got the chance. June went to her bedroom and came back with an envelope. Beverly's handwriting on the front. She'd mailed it to June 2 days before her stroke with a note that said, give this to Ray if anything ever happens to me, and tell him to be careful with Victor. Inside the envelope was a bank statement Beverly had printed herself, a joint investment account managed through Victor's firm, an account I hadn't known existed. Balance as of the previous quarter, $380,000. Beneath that was a life insurance document Beverly had pulled from the household files, $250,000. Beneficiary listed as Richard Oates, not my name. Victor's middle name. Oates was his wife's maiden name. Beverly had tried to protect me from something she'd only half understood, and she'd run out of time. I sat at June's kitchen table and held those documents and felt something break open in the middle of my chest. Not rage. Not yet. Something more like grief. The kind you feel when you realize something was stolen from you before you even knew it was gone. She trusted him, I said. She trusted you, June said quietly. That's why she was trying to fix it before you found out. Earl photographed everything with his phone that night. I sent encrypted copies to Stuart Oakes' firm before I went back to the surgery center for my shift. Subject line, do not open unless something happens to Raymond Delacroix. The next morning, Earl picked me up at the end of my shift and drove me to my brother's neighborhood. We parked 2 streets over and we waited. Victor left at 9:15. Briefcase in hand, the kind of morning a man has when he thinks everything is under control. We didn't follow him. We already knew where he was going and what he was doing. We needed something else. Earl had a contact, a former delivery customer, a notary who did title work and knew people in county records. Inside of 2 days, we had the paper trail. Victor had established a limited liability company 18 months after Beverly died, registered in Delaware, capitalized with $380,000. He'd been taking the dividend payments from Beverly's life insurance since her death, routing them through the LLC and into a separate account. 4 years of payments. By our count, he'd taken somewhere north of $460,000 that belonged to me. He hadn't just refused to help me when I lost my house. He'd taken the money that would have let me help myself. The money Beverly had spent her whole life putting away for us. I sat on that for 3 days. Then I called Victor and told him I'd like to have lunch. He suggested a steakhouse downtown. Of course he did. He sat across from me in a booth by the window, jacket pressed, looking like a man who'd already decided how the conversation would go. "I'm glad you called," he said. "I've been wanting to talk." "Tell me about Beverly's investment account," I said. His face didn't change immediately. That was the thing about Victor. He was good. 25 years of professional practice at delivering bad news to people calmly. But his left hand, the one resting on the table, went still in a way that hands don't go still unless the brain tells them to. "What account?" I put the bank statement on the table. He looked at it. I watched him calculate how much I knew, how much I could prove, whether there was still a version of this he could talk his way out of. "Ray, the life insurance too," I said. "Richard Oates. That's clever. 4 years of payments. I've had the documents for a week. Everything's already with my attorney and with June." Victor leaned back in his chair. When he spoke, his voice had shifted into something I hadn't heard from him before. Something tired and small. "You would have spent it," he said. "Beverly knew that. She said it herself, more than once. You were never careful with money. I built something with it. Something that will last. It was worth more in the right hands." "Were you planning to tell me eventually?" He didn't answer. "The men at the surgery center. Was that a conversation or a plan?" The color in his face went very still. "Because if it was a plan," I said, "then this conversation ends here and I go straight to the Asheville Police Department with the recording. If it was a conversation that you're going to walk away from permanently, starting right now, then you have 72 hours to begin returning what you took. Every dollar with interest." Victor stared at the table. $460,000, I said. "And you should know that Earl has made copies of everything, and it goes to the police whether anything happens to me or not. I've already set it up that way." I pushed back my chair and stood. "Beverly trusted you," I said, and my voice broke on that, just slightly, in a way I hadn't planned. "She trusted you with everything that was supposed to come to me after she was gone. And you sat in the front row at her funeral." I walked out without touching my water glass. Victor didn't call Earl's bluff. He called his attorney instead, and his attorney called Stuart Oates. And within 36 hours, the process of unwinding 4 years of financial fraud was underway. We were back in Earl's van when Stuart called me with the first update. Earl was eating a sandwich, and I was watching the morning light move through the Blue Ridge, and I felt something slow and quiet settle in my chest. The authorities got involved regardless. When Stuart filed the civil claim, the documentation was comprehensive enough that the state attorney's office opened a parallel criminal inquiry. Wire fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. 4 counts connected to the insurance payments. Victor hired the best firm in Asheville, and they really tried, to argue that I'd consented to the financial arrangements in my grief, that I'd been confused in the weeks after Beverly's death, that my memory of events was unreliable. But Beverly's letter to June dismantled all of it. Beverly, who had been sharp and clear-eyed until the end, had documented her concern in her own handwriting, mailed it to her sister, and told her to give it to me if something happened. That wasn't the behavior of a woman whose husband was confused. That was the behavior of a woman who knew something was wrong and was trying to protect the man she loved. The civil judgment came 18 months after my lunch with Victor. Full restitution plus damages. He lost the consulting firm. The house in Kenilworth went to cover part of the settlement. His wife left in that same month, quietly, without making a production of it. I didn't feel good about any of that, but I didn't feel bad about it either. I just felt like the math had finally worked out to something honest. The morning after the judgment, Earl pulled his van into the surgery center lot one last time. I'd given notice the week before. The restitution money was already in escrow, and I was done with overnight shifts. "So what now?" he asked. "I've been looking at property," I said. "Out past Fairview, 20-some acres. There's an old farmhouse on it that needs work. Good bones." He raised an eyebrow. "You know anything about farming?" "Not much, but I know carpentry, and I know how to start over." He finished his sandwich and looked out the windshield at the mountain light. "My route ends in 6 months. company selling to a bigger distributor, and the new contract doesn't include drivers over 60. I looked at him. Property have a barn? He asked. It does. I've always wanted to build things, he said. Never had the space. We closed on the property in late spring. 23 acres in the Fairview community. A farmhouse with good bones and a leaking roof and a barn that needed a new floor. Earl moved into a small rental in Black Mountain while we worked on the house. We spent the first summer fixing everything that 40 years of deferred maintenance had broken. Earl turned out to be a natural with framing. I handled the finish work. We worked in the mornings and ate lunch on the porch and talked about whatever came to mind, same as we'd always done. Except now there is no van and no parking lot and no darkness. June came for Thanksgiving that first year, and she brought her husband and her daughter, and we sat around a table that Earl and I had built ourselves from wood, salvaged from the old barn floor. Someone asked me how I was doing, and I had to think about it for a real moment, the way you do when you actually want to answer honestly. Better, I said. Better than I've been in a long time. My brother wrote to me once, a year into his legal proceedings, before the final sentencing. No excuses in the letter, which surprised me. He said he'd started making those choices small, one thing at a time, and each step had made the next one easier until he couldn't see any more what he'd become. He said he wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted me to know that he remembered who we used to be to each other. Back when we were boys in our father's house in Shelby, before money had meant anything to either of us. I read that letter twice and set it on the kitchen windowsill and didn't answer it for a month. When I finally did, I kept it short. I told him I remembered those years too. I told him Beverly had loved him like a real brother. I told him I needed more time, and maybe someday, but not yet. I left one sentence out of every version I drafted before the final one. I kept taking it out and putting it back in, and then taking it out again. It was just, I forgive you. Simple as that. I couldn't decide if it was true yet, or if I was just saying it because it felt like something I was supposed to say, so I left it out. I figured, when I could write it and mean it, I'd write it. Earl and I don't talk about the heavy things directly. We never have. We talk about the garden fence and what to do about the deer, about whether the barn roof will hold another winter, about the best wood for a porch railing. We sit on that porch in the evenings and watch the light go out of the sky over the mountains, and we don't need much else. One evening in early October, the second autumn on the property, Earl looked out at the darkening hills and said, "Donna used to say the best things in life come from the worst moments. Said you can't have one without the other." Beverly said something similar, I told him. She said the point wasn't to avoid the hard times. The point was to notice who was standing next to you when they happened. He nodded slowly. The kind of nod that means something. I lost Beverly 4 years before any of this started. I lost my brother to something I still don't fully understand, but somewhere in the worst stretch of my life, working the night shift at 64, living out of a motel room, eating half a sandwich in a parking lot at 6 in the morning, I found the best friend I've ever had. He showed up in a bread van at the worst hour of the day and offered me half a sandwich, and he didn't ask for anything back. That's all it was. That's everything it was. There's a thing Beverly used to say when our kids were small and going through some ordinary difficult thing. A bad week at school, a friendship that had gone sideways. She'd say, "Just look for who shows up. Don't worry about everything else. Just notice who shows up." I was 64 years old and starting over with nothing. And the stranger showed up every Thursday morning with a sandwich and no agenda. And it turned out that was enough to save my life. Not just from whatever Victor was planning. From the other thing, the slow erosion that happens when you're alone too long and you start to think that's just how it is now. Don't wait until everything falls apart to look around and see who's actually there. Because they might already be there. You might just not have noticed yet. I noticed, and I'm grateful every single day that I did. I've thought a lot about the chain of it, how one thing led to the next, and how the choices people make. Small ones, quiet ones, the kind nobody else sees, have a way of compounding into something that eventually can't be hidden. Victor didn't wake up one morning and decide to become the man who planned his brother's death in a parking lot. That's not how it works. He started small. He told himself a story. That I wouldn't manage the money well. That Beverly's estate was wasted in my hands. That he was the smarter one, the more capable one. the one who deserved to steward what she'd built. He told himself that story enough times that it became true to him, and each step after that was just logic. Redirect one account, change one beneficiary name, tell one small lie to cover the first lie, until 4 years had passed and he'd taken nearly $500,000 from his own brother and had started thinking about what came next if I ever asked the wrong question. That's what greed does. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives wearing the face of competence and responsibility, and it tells you that you're not stealing. You're just managing things better than the other person would have. I don't say this to excuse him. I say it because I think understanding how something happens is the only real protection against it happening to you. If you don't see the mechanics of it, you can't recognize it when it starts. What I had to reckon with, after everything settled, was my own part in it, not the fraud. That was his doing entirely, but I had trusted without verifying. I had signed documents in grief without reading them. I had assumed that blood meant safety. Beverly saw it. She was sharp enough to notice the numbers didn't add up, careful enough to document it, wise enough to mail that letter to June. She did everything right, and she still ran out of time. The least I could do with the time I had left was learn from her. Earl never asked for anything. Not once. He brought me half a sandwich in a parking lot at 6 in the morning because that's the kind of man he is, and he kept showing up because that's also the kind of man he is, when he had every reason to stay out of something dangerous. When staying involved meant 2 men in dark jackets might consider him a complication, he stayed. Not because he owed me anything, because he'd decided I was worth showing up for. That kind of person is rare. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before. I had taken for granted that the people obligated to me by blood would be the ones who stood with me, and I had overlooked the man in the bread van who had no obligation at all and showed up anyway every morning without being asked. If this story teaches anything, let it be that. Pay attention to who shows up when it costs them something, not who promises to show up, not who has every reason to be there, not who shares your last name. Who actually comes? Who stays when it gets hard? Who risks something they didn't have to risk because they decided you mattered? That's your real family. The rest is just paperwork. I'm 66 years old now, and I sit on a porch I built with my own hands, next to a man who has no obligation to be there, watching the light go off the mountains every evening. I lost a brother, and I found something better. Not because the world is fair. It isn't, and I won't pretend otherwise. But because somewhere in the worst stretch of my life I had the sense to notice who was standing next to me, and I was grateful enough to hold on.